Hello, I'm Katie Spencer and you're listening to Sky News Daily. I'm the arts and entertainment correspondent here, and obviously the last couple of days have seen me covering one story: the sad news of the death of Matthew Perry.
Hey, anybody know a good tailor?
You need some clothes altered?
No, I'm just looking for a man to draw on me with chalk.
Chandler Bing in Friends. It's pretty obvious he was adored by audiences around the world.
I went to that tanning place your wife suggested.
Was that place The Sun?
But as well as the magic he brought on screen and at the theatre, he spoke about his struggles with addiction to drink and, like millions of others in America, prescription painkillers. He hoped his openness about his battle could help other people.
Your disease is just outside, just doing one-arm push-ups, just waiting for you, waiting to get you alone. Because alone, you lose to the disease.
That's him there speaking to ABC News in October 2022. His sensitivity brought a warmth and a depth to his performance, capable of making viewers laugh, cry, and on occasions do both. On this episode, we'll talk about what made him so good, why he was so funny, and what he was like, and his role in the enduring success of Friends.
I think I was at a sort of teenage age where we all thought we were one of the characters. And in my girl mates group, it was like, are you the Rachel? Are you the Monica? I was the Chandler. I loved his style. I loved his sharpness.
This is Vix Leyton, a stand-up comedian, podcaster, and like many of us, a huge Friends fan. She says Matthew Perry inspired a lot of her work.
I loved how he got the joke in at his own expense before somebody else did. And I think that definitely had an impact on me becoming a stand-up comedian. I suspect Chandler's had an influence on quite a few of us, to be honest.
Funniest guy she's ever met. I'm funny, right? What do you know? You're a door. You just like knock-knock jokes.
Well, I was going to say, actually, the delivery that he has, it's more of a sort of stand-up style that he had. He plays with the linguistic sort of element of how he delivers the lines, which is something that you guys do in stand-up. But for actors in sitcoms, it's not a common thing, is it?
No, I don't think he ever tried his hand at straight stand-up, but all of the tactics that made him so powerful to watch and elevated all the scenes that he was in, it was the quirk of an eyebrow, it was the intonation that he used, it was perfect, flawless comedy timing, the physicality of him. It was so much more than acting, and I don't think he ever got the credit for it.
Not all of the comedy on Friends has aged well, but would you argue that actually, at its heart, what Matthew Perry was doing on that show, it was edgy, it was different to what was out there?
I think anything you look back on from that era, there's a lot to be desired in terms of the inclusivity, in terms of how some characters were dealt with and characterized, but everybody had the capacity to become the butt of the joke. So they were quite progressive in their way. They had a lesbian couple that got married and they had a normal relationship. The reason that Susan, the character, was so widely derided by Ross is because he stole her wife. So you could see why he was annoyed at this character. It wasn't because they were gay. It was just they were gay, but that was just another facet of their personality. So I think it was progressive for its time. And if you alienate and if you just isolate a few different scenes and look at it, yeah, we could do better, but it was of its time, which doesn't excuse it, but does sort of explain it, I think.
One of the lovely things to have come out of this, though, is people are sharing his performances. For you, what are the episodes that you look back on fondly? Were there ones that you just love to sort of quote?
So many of his lines have made their way into my head and lived there rent-free for forever. So when he's in the box, I guess this is demonstrative of the kind of comedy skill he had. When he's in the box, because he has stolen Joey's girlfriend and he wants Joey to forgive him, and he pays penance by standing inside this box, you just see his finger. How are you getting a full character through one man's finger through a hole in a box? It is such comedic skill that you knew that character so well that you're like, I believe he's in there, and I believe this finger is demonstrating emotions that there shouldn't be that amount of range on a single digit. He had so much range. He was so much more than just this quirky one-liner guy. And I think it's nice that we're all experiencing these moments now and talking about what a talent he was.
If we're thinking about this, how the season's progressed as well, the very last episode, he was given the very last line to close the show as well. And he was allowed to improvise it as well. He would walk out the building and he just comes up with the very last line, which I think it's Jennifer Aniston asks him, where should we go and get a drink? And he just says, where? And of course, everyone knows they're going to go to the coffee shop, aren't they? But clearly, the writers trusted him to do his own thing. And is that where he shines best, Vic?
I think so. The writers and the creators of the show did say as soon as he walked into the audition, they were like, this is the guy, this is Chandler. And I think it's really hard to separate Matthew Perry from the character because he clearly put so much of himself into the role. And he says that in his book, that he invested so much of his own character, his own style. And you can see that. You can see that in the sadness that he had in himself, in the way that he made himself the butt of the jokes and got in there before everybody else did.
There was a sadness to Chandler as well. There was a sort of tragicomedy to the performance of it. And I wondered whether maybe, do you think his own personal sensitivity, it did sort of lend a depth to a character, which I guess could have been quite unlikable, really, if you just sort of read it as written?
I think that's where Friends is so powerful. It's the reason that young people can still find it relatable, despite the fact that the scenarios wouldn't happen now in the age that we're in, is because you recognise yourself in these characters. You recognise people that you know in the characters. It only works because of the depth that all the actors brought. But I think he did a brilliant job of creating somebody who could have been, you know, that nasty, sharp person in the office that cuts you down to size, but actually you recognise the vulnerability in him. And he was always there to sort of step up. He brought that to the character. It wasn't necessarily written in. I think he was one of the reasons it was such a big success and why it remains inexplicably still popular now when there are millions of other shows that could be watched.
It's so funny, isn't it? And actually, if you look back at the show at its height in the 90s, they were like rock stars almost, weren't they? They were mobbed wherever they'd go.
Yeah, it's really hard to explain it to sort of even people who were like 5 years younger than me, that we didn't have a lot to watch at the time. So even if you were not watching it, you had to explain why you weren't watching it. Everybody had an opinion of it because everyone was talking about it, whether they were talking about it because they admitted that they loved it, whether it's a guilty pleasure. It appealed to all ages. And I think every age you come back to it, you can find something new in it. So I watched the episode where Rachel turned 30 recently, and I'm 39. And at the time, I was completely relating to her character. It was like 30 is the end of the world. Oh, my God. And coming back to it now, you find something new every watch.
His family have spoken about just being so proud of the joy that he brought to so many people. He did, didn't he? That will live on, won't it?
I think so. I think he was worried that his legacy would just be as Chandler from Friends, but I think he underestimated how powerful that character was and how much of a favourite he was, because he was never the star of the show. In, you know, as far as publicity went, it was never his vehicle, but it's only now that you're realising that just that quirk of an eyebrow or the physicality of his body language in the background of a scene, just how much that elevated everybody's performance. And I think it's a really beautiful legacy.
For you, how will you remember him most?
It sounds cliche now, but I felt like I lost a friend when I heard the news because I grew up with that character. So probably from age 13 to 14, like that Matthew Perry and what he brought to that character has been in my life for longer than he hasn't. So I like to think that I'll probably still be quoting those lines to my friends. Like, could I be wearing any more clothes? Like, I'm going to keep saying that even if people don't recognise it and look at me funny.
Thank you for talking to us, Vix.
Well, maybe you're going about this the wrong way, you know? I mean, think about it. Single white male, divorced 3 times, 2 illegitimate children. The personal ad writes itself.
He was very, very keen to prove himself as a serious actor on the London stage.
Someone who knew and worked with him, Lindsay Posner, a West End director who directed the play The End of Longing, which Perry wrote and starred in.
The West End is glamorous to American actors, particularly film and TV actors, in the same way that Broadway has a glamour for the Brits. He was nervous, but actually all directors are slightly uncertain as to how an actor will rise to the technical challenges of being on the stage when they've just done TV and film. But he'd really honed his craft working for years in front of live audiences with friends. It showed. And I was amazed how quickly he took to it vocally and physically and in terms of technique.
Friends catapulted him into this huge, huge level of fame. Was he down to earth in real life? How was he?
Film actors, TV actors will have their own entourage. He had his own PA and fixer with him, which British theatre directors have to adapt to because they'll be in the room most of the time and with various drinks that he needs or events that he wants to organise to go to. But he was incredibly down to earth. He had an uncomfortable relationship with fame and wealth. On the one hand, he enjoyed the trappings of it with private jets and mansions and the access that that sort of power gives you. And on the other hand, he was very much aware that there's a temptation to feel that you're special in some way. And he was always at pains to be very, very down to earth and said to me a few times, I know I'm just an ordinary actor who happens to be cast in Friends, which made me globally famous, which was both humble but not strictly true because he was special. He had and invented his own comic delivery and emphasis and timing, which was idiosyncratic, not generic, and belonged only to him. And he reinvented comic delivery in his very own particular way and influenced a lot of other comedians since.
It can be a hugely exposing process to write, though. I mean, he was at a position in his career where he didn't need to do that. He was incredibly famous, incredibly talented as an actor. What did you make of him and his writing in that respect? Was he keen to be seen in a different light, I guess?
I think he was keen to be taken seriously as both actor and writer. I think for him, in the case of this play, in some ways, it was the message, the content of the piece as an autobiographical piece about addiction. He wanted people to understand the nature of addiction and that it was an illness. And he really pioneered both through this play and he went on a lot of chat shows, both in 2003 and when I first worked with him and in 2015, where he was very open about addiction, wanting people who didn't understand addiction to understand what a horrendous illness it was. And hopefully he wanted the play to show people who were victims of addiction that recovery was possible.
It's quite a rare trait to be that honest and open, really, particularly with Hollywood actors. For him, was that what made him unique as well? He wasn't hiding anything. He wanted to be honest with people that knew him.
I think so. And he had such a terrible battle with the illness before he recovered, and unfortunately did himself a lot of physical damage in the process, that he wanted to share that experience and the dark demons that involves with the public, with the hope that he could be of some help to people who are victims of that.
He wrote in his autobiography that you have to get famous to know that it's not the answer, and nobody who is not famous will ever truly believe that. Tell us what it was like to have someone cast in such a well-known show, translated into 104 languages. What was it like, the level of attention that he got when you went out together?
It was surreal, actually. On the one hand, both myself and the cast developed a very down-to-earth, jokey, friendly rapport with him, and we all got on very well. But then we'd step outside, and on both occasions when I worked for him, he would be mobbed. He couldn't go to Starbucks on his own to get himself a coffee. People in London and in New York, where I did the play, people would rush across the street immediately shouting, Chandler, Chandler, and wanting autographs or selfies or just to be near him and manhandle him. It was, for me, who had very, very little experience with that or come into contact with that level of fame, it was quite overwhelming at times. Similarly, I think we went on a trip to Wimbledon once and it was security. We had to run to the tent to get a drink with security men surrounding us before he was mobbed. And I found it quite alarming. He was used to it, although at times I could see he would find it stifling, but he was very acclimatized to it. But the bottom line was he had to get a taxi, everywhere, or have a driver with a car with darkened windows, even if he had to wanted to go 50 yards down the road to get himself something from a shop.
For you, how do you hope he is remembered?
I do think he's a great loss to the world of comedy, and I'd love for him to be remembered as a great comedic actor, but also as someone who honestly brought and helped people understand the nature of the terrible illness of addiction which he was afflicted. He actually said to me that he hoped that he would be remembered after he died for the work he's done in terms of addiction and helping people, more so than his work on Friends.
Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Sky News Daily Podcast. For more on this story or other showbiz news, be sure to check out the Backstage podcast, hosted by entertainment editor Claire Gregory. See you soon.